Hi, Caleb with Brownells here, and in today's tech tip we're going to be running through the maintenance and just general service and disassembly of your BRN-180 Gen 3. So let's just kind of jump right into it, and we're going to go over like a few kind of like housekeeping things with it first. But first thing we need to do with any firearm ever is to make sure it is in fact unloaded. And then right after that, we'll just do that one more time. So, yep, we're good there. All right. So, all we really need to do now is just start taking this thing apart. And we'll just separate the upper from the lower, as you would with any AR-15 via your takedown and pivot pin. And then, maintenance on this is pretty straightforward. Honestly, you just kind of need to wipe off any excess debris or anything like that. I like to just kind of take a can of air or use an air chuck and just spray some air in there and just blow all the junk out. And that's all you really need to do there. You can put a little bit of lubricant on your trigger's contact surfaces, but really that's all you got to do. So that's pretty straightforward there. But this is kind of where you need to get into it. So I mentioned there were some housekeeping things. Let's talk about them real quick here. So the back plate here that contains your recoil spring is made of polymer, right? And if we push this in, we can slide this tab right here upward and it'll come off. So I want to show you something. What retains this assembly into the back here is this tab on the back of this polymer, right? So the spring tension is basically all on that tab whenever it's not on the lower receiver. So what we want to avoid doing is running the charging handle while it's off the lower receiver, because you're putting extra tension on that tab that doesn't need to be there. So whenever it's off the receiver, to get to the bolts and all that stuff, you just need to simply push in, slide up, and it'll come out the back. Alright, so we'll just take that, set it aside, and your recoil springs will of course slide right off of there. And then now what we can do is take our charging handle and run it all the way back. All the way. And then you'll be able to slide your bolt carrier group right out the back of the firearm. And we can just set that aside for now. So if you look in here, you'll see an arrow facing forward. And that is the sled that is attached to your charging handle. So when your charging handle's all the way in the rear position, you can just kind of pull it straight out of there. And then that sled runs in a track, and in the rear position, it'll fall right out. So you just give it a little kick. And then the way these run together is inside the firearm. You're looking at something kind of like that there. Alright. And we'll set that aside. So that right there is kind of an extended field strip, because you don't really have to take the charging handle sled out. But that's your field strip, okay? So let's get into a more detailed breakdown. Then we'll go over the maintenance. Then we'll jump into reassembly. So what I'm going to need here is a tool. I'm going to need some tools. I got some tools laying around here somewhere. Alright, so I got my Magnatip Brownells screwdriver with my Fix-It Sticks kit here, just because it's convenient. I'll grab this, and I'll try to remember what size this is. It's that one, which is a 5/32. So 5/32 wrench, we'll just plug it right in there and loosen. And you shouldn't even have to take it all the way out, or do you in some cases here? You got to go most of the way at least. I'll just pull it all the way out so you don't have to watch me fidget with it a few times. So we'll set that screw aside, take it all the way out. Alright, and the handguard will actually just, as you witnessed, will slide right off the front. If your handguard is a little tougher to get off, all you got to do is take this thing on the table, holding it by the handguard. Only do this with a muzzle device on, and a wood cert. Don't do this on like concrete or like the hood of your car or something. I know how some of y'all get. So just take it, give it a good bump, and it'll come right off if yours is sticky. Alright, and now we have access to our piston system. So to disassemble a piston system, what we're going to do, you notice there's this little ring on the front. We're just going to take that little guy. It is spring loaded. We're going to pull it forward, and we are going to lift up on this entire adjustment piece. And I'll show you kind of a better view of that once I get it off, show you how it's actually on there. But we're going to lift up just like that. And if you notice, there's slots cut into the front of this piston piece here. And then there's a keyway in here. And then that spring-loaded piece goes into that cut and retains it all together. So you don't have any like clips or anything like that trying to keep up with like on the previous generation. This one, it's all contained one solid piece. Comes right off and stays together. You don't need to do anything else with this piece. Okay, so now we can start disassembling this actual piston here. We're going to pull it all the way back with this piece going through that gas block, and then you'll be able to lift the piston off, and then this midsection here, you can take that off. And then the rear portion of the piston, the actual rod itself and spring, will come off together. Alright. Alright, so you have your actual piston here. This is the piece that's going to really get dirty. And this one is the 4 position because this is the 300 blackout. But if you have the like longer 5.56 ones, everything I'm showing you is exactly the same. Hopefully that's apparent by now because we're almost like halfway through. But it's pretty straightforward. Alright, so this is the piece that's going to require the most cleaning. That rod that we pulled out last, we'll just separate those two components. And then you have your mostly stripped receiver. This is really as far as you need to go for maintenance. This will pretty much cover it. If you want to take things apart further, for whatever reason, go for it. I'm not going to be showing you that in this video. Maybe we'll do that in another video because I know a lot of you guys are like Cerakoting these and stuff like that, and for that you definitely have to strip them all the way down. And your rubber dust cover, we're not going to go through pulling that off, but it's actually just pinned in place. But again, maybe that's for a later video. So let's just kind of keep going with the maintenance process here. So while you have your receiver apart, just clean that first. All you need to do, just get a rag. You can use some Q-tips, gun scrubber, whatever. Spray it in here. Just wipe it down. Just get all the gunk out of here. But before you do that, I'd recommend cleaning the barrel. So just using a bore brush, going from the rear to the muzzle, and then run some patches through. If you don't know how to do any of that, we have a ton of cleaning videos out there. I'm not going to really get into that in this one. Just run a brush through with some solvent, run some patches through, a little bit of gun oil, and you're good to go. Alright, and I'll try to remember to link those videos in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. But with that being said, that's all you got to do on the receiver. Okay, so now let's move over to the springs. We'll just do all the springs together because maintenance on those is pretty easy. All you need to do is take a rag. I have a rag. And just wipe down the outside of the springs. There shouldn't be much gunk at all on the insides of them. Just wipe down the outsides. Alright, there you go. And then we'll set those aside because we don't need to do anything else with them. Then we have our guide rods for the spring. I'm just going to wrap my rag around these from back to front and just give them a wipe. Just like so. This little sled piece here, just give it a good wipe down. Shouldn't get too dirty. Same thing with your front piston retainer. I'm just wiping off all these small parts here in no particular order. Just wipe them down. Your piston pieces are probably, they're going to be the dirtiest. So you can take a M16 style brush and just brush them off. Put a little bit of solvent, oil. I know you're asking what kind of solvent or oil. Literally your favorite gun oil, your favorite gun solvent, it's all good. I say it's all good. I'm going to eat those words. It's all good as long as you're sticking with like an actual like brand of firearm solvent and lubricant. Alright, you're just going to wipe down this piston assembly here. Or not assembly, this is actually just the piston. And again, take a brush, scrub it, use some solvent. That's all there is to it. And I already wiped this other cup, this piston cup down. Piston rod, same thing as those Recoil spring guide rods. Just wipe it off. Okay, now that we're done just wiping down all the other little pieces here, let's go through disassembly of this bolt carrier group. So it's very similar to an AR-15. If you've done one of those, you'll be able to figure this one out. So if you look at the back here, you have a retaining pin for your firing pin, this cotter pin here. You're just gonna, same way you do on the M4 or AR-15, is you're just gonna pull that out. So just like so, set it on the table. Your firing pin is now removable. That is an AR-15 firing pin. No, nothing crazy there. So this is an AR-15 firing pin and retaining pin, so those shouldn't break, but if they do, you know where to get extras. Just any one will do. And then your cam pin. This is where things start to get different. This is your cam pin. It is not an AR-15 cam pin. It is a little different. Just take it, wipe it off, and as you disassemble these parts, just wipe them off. It's that easy. And then once your cam pin's out, your bolts will come out, and there's a spring on the tail of your bolt. Just take that spring off, and at this point you know what to do. Just gently wipe it off. Same thing with the actual bolt. We're just going to give that a good wipe down. And on the face of it here, you can get a... So we sell these Q-tips. They have a wood stick with a Q-tip in, and I use these things for everything. And these are very handy. You can just use one of those. Wipe down that bolt face. If you want to clean under your extractor, you don't have to do it every single time, but you do have to do it eventually. You can just push this pin out, because this pin is just gently in there, I should say, because it is retained by the actual bolt carrier body, so it can't go anywhere. So just like that's another AR-15 part. That's the same as an AR-15 as well. I'm going to put all the AR-15 interchangeable parts up here, actually. And then you have your extractor, the spring, and that little donut piece on the spring there to add more tension. Also, all AR-15 interchangeable. Interchangeable parts are great. And that looks pretty good in there. So if you want to get down inside of there, I'd use a pipe cleaner. I don't have any in front of me right now, but Brownells also sells these heavy-duty pipe cleaners. So I use them for cleaning AR-15s. I also use them in my tobacco pipe. So they work great for both of those. And we're just going to set that aside. So, oh, the bolt carrier. Almost missed one. again with this, same thing. Wipe down the outside. There's a bunch of holes in this thing. You can get to all of them with a Q-tip. And the great thing about this being a piston gun, there's not a ton of junk that gets into the receiver area. Unless you're shooting suppressed, then that's just unavoidable. But if you're doing it on the right gas setting and you're using it depends on the type of suppressor you're using too, so I shouldn't even say that. But everything's a little different. Some will run dirtier than others, so that's just how it is. So once you have this clean, let's go over reassembly and lubrication. Alright, so what we're going to do, I'm going to take my oil, my preferred gun oil here, and also I did mention gun scrubber earlier. Great cleaning solution is the Brownells gun scrubber. I had some hiding under there. But anywhere you put this, you've got to put oil because this is a degreaser. So I'll just set that aside there. Okay, so let's just start kind of in the reverse order for the most part. I'm going to put this bolt carrier group back together. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with that extractor. And if you want to put any oil on here, the only place you really need to put it, I put just a dot of it on the spring. Then inside this little cut here where that pin rides, that's it. That's all I do. Then we'll lay that in. We'll take the pin, and all you do is just push that extractor in and push your pin in. Now you just got to make sure the pin's flush, because if it's not, you're not going to be able to get it back inside the bolt carrier. And for that, I'm just going to use the side of my screwdriver. Alright, I know you couldn't see what I was doing there, but I just literally forced it in, just popped it right in. Okay, now we can take this spring, but before we do that, I'm going to put a dot of oil here and use my fingers to spread it around. Slide that spring on over there. And then I will take this thing and put it back together. So we're just going to put the bolts into the bolt carrier. So it'll only go in one way, so you can't do it wrong. So we'll stick it in. Now we need to identify which way this firearm is actually ejecting, because that's the way our extractor is going to need to face. Easiest way to do that is to look at this dust cover on the side. This is this little reciprocating piece here. As the dust cover you see when the firearm's assembled. So it is made out of polymer. So just make sure your extractor is facing that general direction. It doesn't have to be exactly, just that general direction. Because you're going to need to line up the hole in your bolt with the slot in your bolt carrier. Now, you can take your cam pin, but before we do that, I'm just going to put a dot of oil on the cam pin. Put oil anywhere you see surfaces wearing, because that's your contact surfaces. Alright, so now we're going to push this on in. And a part we didn't take out, but it comes out the same way it does on the AR-15, also another interchangeable part, is going to be the ejector, which is that little pin right there. If you want more info on how to swap those out, we've got content on that already, so I'm not going to go into that here, but you will need a punch and hammer. But the point I'm getting at here is that your ejector should be facing the cam pin, and your extractor should be facing your dust cover. And then when we put the cam pin in, there's a hole that goes right through it. Just make sure that that's front to back, so it should look just like that. Because your firing pin, when you reinsert it, has to go through there. And your firing pin, you can put oil on there, don't put much. I have a little bit of residual oil on my fingers from spreading stuff around. That's all I'm going to use on it. And then we're going to drop that in the back. And we're going to push it forward. Make sure it goes back to where it's almost flush. It should almost be flush with the back, not quite. And then we'll take our cotter pin, and going in from the cam pin side, we're just gonna squeeze it together and push it all the way through until it won't go any further. And that is how you reassemble the BRN-180 Gen 3 bolt carrier group. Alright, let's go ahead and throw our piston assembly back together. Alright, so the way this thing kind of goes together outside the gun is you have your piston up front that goes through the gas block. You have the piston cup, which slides over the piston. You have your rod and your spring, and that's how they're going to go together. So let's do that on the gun. And for oil, I'm just going to put a little bit on here, and again spread it around. I mean, it's not super necessary, I should say. The first shot you fire, it's blowing all this oil off anyway. But put a little on there. Just kind of rub it around in that cup. Alright, and then we'll take these two pieces here. I'll just stick them together for now. This rod, I'm going to put oil on. And I'm going to spread that oil around. Take the spring, and it'll go on either direction. Doesn't matter which way. And then I'm going to take this whole assembly here. And then if you notice, there's 3 holes in the front. The 2 larger holes are kind of cut for this thing here, so that's where those will essentially nest, I should say. I'm just trying to put them in there to show you. So when your gun's assembled, it'll look like that. So the hole in the middle is the one for the piston assembly. Alright, so take the rod and the spring first. Put them in that middle hole we just identified. And then you're just going to hold this all the way back. Then you're going to take your piston and cup, insert using that kind of small pointed end. They fit together, just like so. And then when you relieve forward tension, the piston should come through the front just like that. Now, what you need to do is rotate so that it is on one of the settings. So, like I said, this being the 300 blackout, you have 4 settings, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm just going to set it at, actually I'm going to set it at 2. So the 2 should be facing upward. You'll see why in just a moment. And then, once we have that on there, you can put a dot of oil on these little ways here. And then you can take your retaining piece facing upward, holding on to that little ring in the front, and just slide it on. And actually, so once you get it positioned, I'm trying to do this so y'all can see it. I can't really see what I'm doing, that's why it looks a little clumsy. Alright, so you get it started in the raceways there, then you pull forward and push down, and it'll slide right on. Alright, so it can be it can be reassembled in any of the positions. This being a 4 position, again, the longer 5.56s only have 3 positions. But if it's not in position 2, then you will not be able to fit the handguard over it. That's why we have it in position 2. And with that being said, it is now time to reinstall the handguard. If you're like actually doing stuff with your gun, the handguard will get muddy and dusty and whatever. Just wipe that down. Just get the mud off, the dust off, whatever. If it's just dusty, just hit it with some compressed air. That'll be fine. Slide it over. all the way. And if for whatever reason yours is really tight going back on, what you can do not do this with the back plate on, but what you can do is just give it a gentle bump on the bench. Just some gentle taps and it'll go right on. Okay, now we have this screw, goes right back in the hole. You don't need Loctite or thread locker or anything like that on here. If you're really feeling paranoid about it, you can, let me grab it here, use a little bit of the Brownells shock vibration resistant thread coating. Just a pinch of it. You don't need much. But I'm just going to do this hand tight, make it nice and snug. I'm not necessarily going to use a torque setting on it. And for those of you who are OCD, if you want a torque setting, I will make one up for you right now. And let's see here. And since this is the like Brownells official video, then this can, whatever I say is the Brownells official torque spec, right? That makes sense to me. Let's see where we're gonna go here. Let's call it 45 inch-pounds. Boom. 45 inch-pounds up there. Alright, so now we just need to, we're at the point where we reassembled from the more in-depth strip. We're back to a basic field strip now. And what we need to do at this point is take our sled, because that's the last thing that came out, so it's the first thing that'll go in. And on these points, these little rails that run in the keyway in the receiver, those are what you're going to want to lubricate. This is what will make it feel smooth, or not, if you don't lubricate it. Then I'll put some lubricant on the bottom that runs against the receiver. And this is just kind of like a little relief cut for dirt and junk, so you don't need to put any there. Alright, so you notice there's a giant arrow cut into this thing. That is to make sure I do this video correctly, but also it's to help you whenever you're putting it back together. So we're going to rotate that to the forward direction there, and we'll just kind of like it's almost like you're installing your AR-15 charging handle, right? Because you got to push it into the keyway, then push it forward. Very similar thing with this, we just got to get it into that keyway. And if you look in there, I don't know if you'll be able to see this well on camera, but you can see the cuts where it drops in. So I'm going to do this while I'm looking at it, because it will be almost impossible for me to do it while I'm showing you. I'll show you once I get it in there though. You'll feel it click into place just like a standard AR-15 charging handle. Come on, there we go. Okay. And then once it's in place, it'll just kind of be there. Okay, so now take your charging handle, and your charging handle faces downward. It goes at a downward slope. If you try to put it in at an upward slope, and it goes back here, if you try and put it in at an upward slope, it will not work. Okay, you got to put it in downward. So it only goes in, only works one way. And then once your charging handle is in that slot of the sled, you can just run it all the way forward until it clicks into place, like so. And then now we can put the rest of it back together. Alright, so on these rods, your recoil spring guide rods, we're just going to put some light oil on those. And I don't know if I said this or not, but the oil I'm using is Sons of Liberty Spec 76. Then your recoil springs are non-directional. They'll go on either way, so just throw them on there. And I know your question may be, when should I replace recoil springs? That's a loaded question. It depends on if you're shooting suppressed, unsuppressed, you know, whatever. If you're shooting suppressed, they're gonna wear out a lot sooner. But I would say for an average shooter, like every 5,000 rounds or so, if you're shooting suppressed, sooner than that. Okay. And I know you're saying, how much sooner? I don't know. I don't know what suppressor you're using. It all depends. If you notice your gun starts functioning sluggish or just not as well, it's probably a good indicator it's time to change them. Okay, so the bolt carrier group, since this is the open side with your ejection port, that's the side your dust cover is going to be facing. Easy enough, right? Oh, and your bolt obviously going to be facing forward. Alright, so just take it and drop it in just like so. It will go right in. Then you have recoil spring and guide rods. Make sure your retaining plate in the rear is in the up position. Drop these back in. They're going to go through the holes in the bolt carrier group. And you just got to look in there. And the springs, they want to go to their home. You just got to help guide them. And then push them in. Push all this forward all the way. Once the retainer is flush with the receiver, close the door. And that's all there is to it. Now, to do a function check, put this on a lower. Don't rack it with it off the lower, as we mentioned before. Alright, there we go. Now we can do a full function check. So we'll run that charging handle. Gun's on safe. Nothing will happen. We'll put it on fire, pull the trigger, click. Now while holding the trigger down, we'll run the charging handle, listen for the reset, back to safe, and nothing happens. We're good. And that's all there is to it. So that is the basic field strip and maintenance for the BRN-180 Gen 3. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you need help with anything for any reason ever, feel free to give us a call on the tech line. We'll be happy to help you out. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.